I'd like to welcome Dr. Elliott Malamet and Professor Asa Kasher. Dr. Elliott Malamet teaches Jewish philosophy, Machshavet Israel at Yeshivat Machanaim, and English literature at Hebrew U. And Professor Kasher is Professor Emeritus in philosophy at Tel Aviv University, and he's the author of the Code of Ethics for Tzahal. And they will be discussing the ethics of war. Thank you.
So as Rabbi Hefter said, I'm Dr. Elliott Malamet. Good morning. Professor Kasher and I have had this discussion previously, and I think we can have it several more times before we exhaust really what the topic entails. When we look at just war theory, in Latin, jus bellis justum, it's a doctrine of military ethics which sets criteria to ensure that war is morally permissible. And the criteria are split into two groups, which is A, the right to go to war in the first place, what's called jus bellum, and the right conduct in war once you're fighting, which is jus in bello. And the first concerns the morality, obviously, of going to war, and the second with moral conduct inside of the war. And what is right conduct in war is a question that is increasingly at the top of the list of social political concerns around the world. It's much more complicated than it used to be, and ideas like, for instance, which are fairly contemporary ideas, like distinguishing what is a combatant and what is a non-combatant. What does it mean to cause disproportionate harm to innocents, and the military necessity of carrying out actions that often crop up in discussions about the ethics of war. And it's precisely these categories that become increasingly slippery in the advent of contemporary conflict. And the reason is because the domain has switched from war between conventional armies and identifiable governments to more asymmetrical conflicts between countries and often semi-fugitive or even terrorist-type entities. So it's really my pleasure to introduce Professor Kasher. He is the Laura Schwartz Kipp Professor Emeritus of Professional Ethics and Philosophy of Practice and Professor Emeritus of Philosophy at Tel Aviv University. His research is enormous. It covers a broad range of topics in philosophy and ethics, but as Rabbi Hefter pointed out, he is the author of Tzahal's Code of Ethics, which was published by the Israeli Ministry of Defense. You can find it. It's public domain. He's worked with others on the Code of Ethics of the Knesset, the Code of Ethics of the Ministers. That one's probably harder to finish. So please welcome Professor Kasher. So first, I'd like to explore with you a little bit the line between what we call just war and an unethical military campaign and how human rights figure in the midst of an armed conflict. I guess to put it a different way, what kind of war can Israel and other Western countries fight? What are they morally permitted to fight, and what role do innocent civilians play? So we've had this conversation before. I want to flesh it out a bit with you, and I'll be the foil this morning because we don't have Michael Walzer with us, so I'm going to play his role. Professor Walzer, who you know, is at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, in a 2006 article wrote the following about Hezbollah. Quote, Israel's now at war with an enemy whose hostility is extreme, explicit, unrestrained, and driven by an ideology of religious hatred, unquote. Despite that, he also argued that civilian shields are, he also argued that civilian shields are cruel, they're an immoral way of fighting, there can't be any direct attacks on civilians, notwithstanding. Right? So even though all that's true, you can't attack civilians, he wrote, even if the enemy doesn't believe in the existence of civilians. Right? So he was critical of the claim that you made along with Amos Yavlin, that Israeli soldiers take precedence over the safety of the other side's civilians. That was the basic gist of the argument between Professor Kasher and Professor Walzer that took place over a number of articles and public disputes. Professor Walzer said that idea is wrong and dangerous and erodes the distinction between combatants and non-combatants. So I'd like you to discuss something in that line to begin with.
Thank you very much for playing the role of Michael Walzer. I mean, during the years, he has become closer and closer to our view. I mean, he has not adopted it fully in full-fledged manner, but he is now elsewhere, whereas we stayed where we were. Let me point out the two fundamental principles that a democracy like the Israel or the UK or the United States of America have to manifest in their warfare. There is one principle, Walzer never mentions it, but you will see in a minute why it's significant. I'm talking about the right and duty of self-defense. I mean, usually we speak about the right of self-defense. That's familiar to everyone, both on domestic law. If someone assaults me on the street, then I have the right to defend myself. And it applies to the on the international level as well, in the Charter of the United Nations, in international law, everywhere. So if a state is attacked or about to be attacked and cannot stop the attack otherwise, then it has the right of self-defense. But I'm talking about something else as well, namely the duty of self-defense. I mean, the right of self-defense is vis-a-vis the enemy. But what about the government and the citizens? I mean, there is a relationship between the government and the citizens. When the state is under attack, actually, it's the citizens who are under attack. It's not the abstract entity, the legal framework called a state. It's me and you and she and her are under attack. So under such circumstances, a democracy has the duty to defend its citizens, which means to take the right steps in order to eliminate the danger, or at least mitigate the jeopardy to their life to the best extent it can. So one cannot guarantee that no citizen is going to get hurt by a Hezbollah rocket, Katyusha, but one can do one's best in order to stop the Hezbollah from launching their rockets on the battleground. Now, how do you implement the duty of self-defense? Okay, I mean, there is a major difference between Israel and the United States. And I think Walzer is a friend of mine, he's very clever, and I mean, I have to praise him all the time, but there is something he doesn't understand. He doesn't really appreciate. Namely, when we are in a war, almost all the warriors are conscript soldiers, which means they are there because there is conscription, because there is a law that says that a boy and a girl, 18 years old, have to become members of the Israel Defense Force, of the IDF. And so the IDF is us in Israel. It's me and my father and my sons and my daughter and my students and my neighbors and my friends. Everyone was there, or is still there, or is going to be there. So it's us. Now think about the United States. Do you know someone who is in military uniform? Ask yourself. I'm not asking you. Okay, there is one. One person who knows one person. Two. Okay, excellent. But it's not us. In the United States, it's not us. It's some them, a remote them. I used to frequent UCLA, and I was on the campus after the first Gulf War for summer. Nobody there knew a person. Nobody there was in the Gulf, let alone had been a warrior during the first Gulf War. Nobody knew anybody who was in the Gulf. Nobody knew anybody who knew anybody who was in the Gulf. So it's a remote them. So there is a difference in the sense of responsibility. I mean, for us to take part in a war is shouldering the responsibility for the life of us, for the life of our soldiers, which means our life. Now imagine yourself in a position where you shoulder the responsibility for sending a certain person into battle, from which he can return safe, from which he cannot return at all. There is a possibility he won't return at all. Dead or captured by the enemy or whatever. So there is a there is a difference in the relationship to the soldiers. Our soldiers are not professionals that have undertaken to defend the Constitution by all means. Our soldiers are doing their job in defending the state and its citizens against any enemy according to the commands they are given by the commanders, and in turn according to the command given by the government. In the United States, the president is the commander-in-chief. In Israel, it's the government who is the commander-in-chief. So when we speak about the duty of self-defense, we think about the participation of citizens in military uniform, conscripts, who have not volunteered to be there, but were sent by us to be there. So we must be very sensitive, I mean, I think that we must be very sensitive whenever there is a person in jeopardy, even if he is a professional SEAL or pilot or soldier or Marine or whatever you have in the U.S. forces. But we owe our soldiers particular sensitivity. And what we claimed, and Walzer did not agree, although he did not face it directly because he cannot, disagree with what I'm going to say, so he faced it indirectly. Look at the packages of duties we owe people on earth. Okay? A package of duties. The largest, the heaviest package of duty a state has vis-a-vis a person is to its citizens, right? It has to guarantee their liberties, their life against all kinds of dangers stemming from different sources. It has to enable them to participate in elections. I mean, it's a very heavy package of duties that a democratic state has when its citizens are under consideration. Now, when people who are not citizens are under consideration, like permanent residents or so, it's a similar package, almost the same. I mean, the differences are political. They cannot participate in all the elections and several other minutiae like that. I mean, by and large, it's the same package. Now, what about the citizens of other states, say of the United States or Canada? What package of duties does Israel have when a problem in Canada has emerged? Okay. A tiny little package of duties, right? We cannot turn a blind eye if there is some catastrophe that Canada cannot, manage on its own. But usually Canada or the United States or the United Kingdom or Germany can manage on their own, and they don't need our help, and we don't have any duty with respect to them. When it's famine or genocide and things like this, that we have a duty. We have duties, but they're much lighter than the duties we have to our own citizens. Now, where are the soldiers in this picture? And what we say is that soldiers are citizens in military uniform for a certain period. So we allow ourselves, according to the democratic arrangements, to send them into the battlefield. But they never lose their status as citizens. They're citizens. And we have to protect the life of every citizen. Means we have to protect the life of our soldiers, our citizens in military uniform as well. We cannot just regard them as instruments. I mean, Walzer, it's amazing. I thought that kind of depiction of soldiers as instruments of the state is long gone and dead. But Walzer, in a recent paper, says that soldiers are instruments of the state. Our soldiers are not instruments. Our soldiers are human beings. We owe them protection of human dignity. We owe them protection of citizens. They're not our instruments, our disposable instruments. Now, what are our duties towards the neighbors of the terrorists, citizens of an enemy state who are not jeopardizing our life? which are most of the Palestinians, do not jeopardize our life. So they are neighbors. Unfortunately, they find themselves in a position of being a neighbor of a terrorist. So what are our duties toward them? Okay, that's the general duty of a democracy, to protect human dignity. So we have to comply with the principles that have already been mentioned of distinction and proportionality, properly understood, in order to minimize casualties among them, minimal collateral damage, as it's called in military ethics and international law. Minimize collateral damage and proportionality. Perhaps we'll return to it, and I'll say a few words about the idea of proportionality, but the principle that we comply with, and they restrict our activities against the enemy when collateral damage is a possibility, without obstructing our way to accomplish the mission, which is defending our own citizens, which is a must. We're never going to jeopardize our citizens in order to minimize damage among the citizens of the other side. I mean, that would be utterly immoral and even insane. What is the blood of our neighbors rather than the blood of our citizens? I mean, that's impossible. Now, there is one point where there is, that's the issue you mentioned, one point where there is something special to ponder. Namely, okay, there are, assume the following situation. Okay, there is a neighborhood, and we know that there are quite a number of terrorists in the neighborhood, but also quite a number of people who have nothing to do with terrorism. We don't want to hurt the second party at all. Ideally, zero collateral damage. Now, we have to defend our citizens from activities taken by the terrorists in this neighborhood. And what are we going to do about the double mission, the triple mission, to protect our citizens, to minimize damage, to minimize collateral damage among the non-terrorists, and to minimize casualties among our troops as well. Their citizens and their troops. So what we do under several kinds of circumstances is to use a whole battery of precautionary steps. So we warn them. We warn them by distributing leaflets. We warn those who are not terrorists. And we know that the terrorists also are going to be warned, but we can afford it. So leaflets, breaking into the broadcast on television and radio, those are all the methods used already in the World War II. But then there are new methods. We make phone calls. We make hundreds of thousands of phone calls into their cellular phones, into their regular phones, in their apartments, to warn them. Of course, it's done by computers, but the computers have a database that includes all the phone numbers, personal and otherwise, of those Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and they get a phone call telling them that within a short time, then that's going to become where they reside. The area where they reside is going to become a battlefield. They have plenty of time to remove themselves from that area. It's not a matter of minutes. Sometimes it's a matter of days. Hours, definitely. Then we have the so-called knock on the roof practice, which is a missile which hits a roof of a building where there are non-terrorists as well as terrorists. It's not explosive, but very noisy. So that's the last hint that we are going to attack. Now you have a short while to evacuate, not a long while, but enough for getting out of the house and getting somewhere else and saving yourself. We have visit all the time. We know what's going on. So we see that almost all of them leave after being warned. So the area now is not empty, but there are two groups of people there. The terrorists, and some people who have decided not to leave their apartments or their buildings. The human shields. Some of them are human shields, which means they voluntarily shoulder the responsibility to protecting the terrorists from our attack by being there. Now, I'm the commander of, say, of a company of people, and now I have to decide what should be done about those people who are still there and who are not terrorists, but just human shields. Now, they're not terrorists in the sense that they're not shooting at me, and they don't intend to shoot at me, they have not done it in the past, so they are not involved in violent activities, but they serve as, voluntarily serve as the human shields of terrorists. Now, what should I do? I can ignore the difference between the terrorists and the human shields. Those are terrorists, those are people who shield them in order to save them. Sorry, I have to protect my citizens, and that's the end of the period of waiting. I disregard the difference between human shields and terrorists. But my soldiers are not going to be jeopardized because of that, disregarding the difference between terrorists and others, and the human shields. Now there is another method I can use, namely to send my troops into the building in order to see who is a terrorist and who is a human shield, and drag out the human shields away from the building. This will not disregard the distinction between human shields and the terrorists, but very clearly endanger my troops in order to save the lives of those who stay there voluntarily, although I warned them half a score of times. So this is what Walzer wants us to do. We're never going to do it. We're never going to, he has ridiculous, I'm sorry for using a strong expression, but he has a ridiculous example of perhaps a person has not left his apartment because he is afraid that his carpets are going to be looted. Which means that I ought to jeopardize the life of my troops, sending them into a house where there are terrorists or just waiting to kill them, just because there is an idiot there, sorry, who is afraid of, in the battlefield, what he has to think about is the possible looting of his carpets. Okay? We are not going to jeopardize lives of our soldiers because of people who are afraid of being looted, of the carpets being looted. We have a third way of doing it. We don't send our troops in, but we don't disregard the difference, which means that we try our best in order to minimize collateral damage among our semi-enemies. They're not the terrorists, but they are there as human shields in order to make it much more difficult for us to fight against the terrorists. So they are on the other side of the battlefield. They are not neutral. They are on the side of the terrorists. But since they are not terrorists themselves, then we'll do our best in order to minimize the collateral damage among them, to minimize casualties among them. To summarize it, there is the principle of the right of self-defense, the duty of self-defense, but there is another principle, namely protection of human dignity. Okay, in religious terms, it's protection everyone who is in God's image. Okay, there is God's image in everyone, every person, right, without an exception. Which means in us, in our soldiers, in our enemies, in our worst enemies, like the Hezbollah or the Hamas or Osama bin Laden. Okay, there is God's image in every human being. So we owe every human being protection of one's human dignity. However, when there are frictions, when there are clashes between the duties to protect human dignity of different parties, then there is a hierarchy. And the hierarchy is the hierarchy of a democracy. It's not ethnic, nationalist, racist, whatever. It's according to the package of duties that the state owes different people. The package of duty Israel owes the citizens has nothing to do with whether the citizen is Jewish or Arab or a Christian or Muslim or whatever. The package of duties the state has to, with respect to the soldier, has nothing to do with the ethnic origin of the soldier, or one's gender, or one's color, or whatever. I mean, it's human dignity. Human dignity. And what people are inclined to forget is that combatants are human beings, and there is the human dignity of everyone, so there is the human dignity of combatants. And we have to protect it more than we are used, or that we are used to do in different situations. And we insisted on it. And when we talk to officers in other military forces, like on many other occasions, they do what we do, but they speak less.
So I think everybody can understand the sort of way all of these factors have to be reconciled and thought of. Let's talk about some of the problematics that occur in real life. And I guess I would describe it, there's a criticism of what you're articulating that might come from quote-unquote the left, and a criticism that might come quote-unquote from the right. Theoretically, let's look at it this way. Let's say that you begin with a justified moral premise for defending yourself, rockets are falling. So you attack. And as it happened in 2014, you not only attack in the air, you go into neighborhoods, you risk your own soldiers, and so on. But let's take that scenario a bit further. What happens if, despite everything you do, and the hundreds and hundreds of people you kill, that Hamas does not surrender, does not try to achieve any kind of temporary ceasefire or hudna or whatever phrase you want to call it? In theory, if they keep attacking, how many innocent civilians would you be, quote-unquote, permitted to kill under this scenario? Would you have to keep going and keep going and keep going? So that's one side of the argument of proportionality. The other problem is on the other side, which is you're doing all this, and what is the actual aim of conflict at this point, right? The aim of conflict used to be, it seems to me, to win, right? Now, not quoting my favorite American here, Henry Kissinger, however, when he talked about policy in Vietnam, he said something that makes me think about Israel. He said, the guerrilla wins if he doesn't lose, and the army loses if it doesn't win. And I think that's noteworthy, right? There used to be one tactical principle in war, and the principle was you use the means at hand, said Patton, to inflict the maximum amount of death and destruction in the minimum amount of time in order to win. So what we have here is we seem to have a problem both ways, right? Which is that on one side there's a moral problem of innocent suffering. On the tactical side, it's what's all this suffering for if you don't actually win and you just repeat the conflicts every few years. So I'd like you to address both of these sides.
First of all, I don't accept any statement that you quoted. I mean, all of them are wrong.
Okay.
Interestingly wrong, importantly wrong. First of all, let's start with the right. Okay, with what you quoted from Kissinger. I mean, the idea that a war is intended to end in a situation where I won it is obsolete. I mean, we don't win wars, we don't lose wars, we accomplish our missions or do not accomplish our missions. We do it successfully or unsuccessfully. The idea that you can destruct the enemy like the Allies destructed Germany once and for all is gone. It doesn't fit the situation of fighting organizations. It doesn't take more than one person and one donkey and a magazine full of Katyushas in order to go on launching Katyushas in Galilee forever. Okay. So we cannot reach the desired end of hostilities, but
Do you feel that ended with the end of World War
but
II?
this enabling just a second, but this enabling them from going on jeopardizing our lives. They will forever be able to jeopardize our lives, even if they don't have submarines and planes and tanks and heavy other types of military equipment. So they have just, very simple ways of doing it, and they have cyber, which is complicated and important, and there they can excel. I mean, never become close to the excellence of Israel, but they can cause a lot of harm by cyber operations. So our basic formula is we have to defend our citizens. And if it involves killing innocent people on the other side, in a proportional manner, under conditions of necessity, then we'll go on doing as long as it's necessary. Sorry to say it, but people on the other side are going to get killed if they're the neighbors of the terrorists, as long as they're terrorists. And as long as we cannot draw sharp distinctions between the terrorists and the others. And therefore, they have to evacuate immediately. They have to avoid volunteering to become human shields. They have to remove themselves from the areas of friction, and we beg them to leave those areas. I mean, we do whatever we can in order to draw a distinction between the two groups. We cannot remove the terrorists from the non-terrorists because the terrorist strategy is to fight us from there. But we can try to remove the non-terrorists from the vicinity of terrorists. And we do it all the time. I mean, we are the, I don't want to sound boastful, but we are the best. So says the world, not so says the spokesperson of the IDF. I mean, after the Protective Edge, Operation Protective Edge, there was a mission of inquiry here. It consisted of generals and retired general and colonels, admirals from the whole West. It was chaired by a former chief of staff of Germany. Very, very high-ranking officer. And they got access to everyone. To the Prime Minister, Minister of Defense, Chief of Staff, all the way down to the battalion commanders. And they were shown intelligence as well. And they wrote a report. You can read a report on the internet. If it's too long, there is a summary of the report. You can read it. One of the claims they make is that nobody takes care of the life of the non-combatants in the vicinity of the terrorists like Israel. And they have experience from Afghanistan and Iraq and Somalia and similar places. So we really do our best. Ideally, there is zero collateral damage. And it breaks my heart to see a picture of a child getting killed because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, when I see a picture of such a child, I mean, I'm not a fan of the New York Times or any other American outlet, the CNN or so, because we found out that sometimes when they show you a picture of a miserable child hurt or dead in Gaza, actually he died in Syria, because we discovered the same picture taken in Syria several months earlier, where he was killed not by Israel but by Syria. But they're unscrupulous liars. I mean, they don't have any problem in using any picture, any expression, anything they want to say and to show in order to enhance their propaganda. So they is the terrorist organization. I'm not making, general. racist generalizations. I'm not speaking about Palestinians, Arabs, things like this. But the organizations are unscrupulous.
Yes.
So we do our best. We do our best to minimize it. Every casualty among the non-combatants pains our heart. And we have special units. I assume that the United States and United Kingdom also have such units, but we don't know anything about them. They don't tell us too much about it. But I can tell you about a special unit in Israel. I mean, there is a special unit of physicists, statisticians, computer scientists, pilots, and other people whose job is to minimize collateral damage. When we do a targeted killing operation, I mean, we kill a certain person in a certain building because we cannot capture him. Had there been an ability to capture him, then the pilot would kill him by using the lethal ammunition. But when we plan it, that unit looks for nearly hundreds of options. What kind of plane, what kind of missile, what part of the day, what direction. I mean, there are hundreds of parameters and combinations of those parameters, and they have their computational simulation, and then they opt for one certain way, which is going to be successful on the one end, high probability of hitting the target, and minimal collateral damage on the other hand. So it's their job to do it. During Operation Protective Edge, there is a squadron of light planes. Nobody has heard it because, they're not interested in such news. A squadron of light planes. You can see them. They are on the shore of Tel Aviv. There is an Air Force base to the north of Tel Aviv, near the power station. You can see them. Whenever there was air activity above Gaza, they were there too. Their mission was to see whether conditions have changed in the area of the target. If conditions had changed, which means proportionality considerations do not hold anymore, because a yellow bus appeared all of a sudden, or things like this, or a crowd emerged in the street, then they abort the mission. Now, guess what percentage of missions had been aborted because of those light planes, and there are many others that were aborted because of other reasons. So 20% of the missions were aborted because the light plane saw the area and the pilot said, conditions have changed significantly, don't do it. If it's a necessity, then they will do it. But that's very rare. If there is a person who is very influential on the one end, very evasive on the other end, protecting, it's very important for the protection of Israelis to hit him, then we'll do it anyway. But that's a rarity among rarities. Usually you can postpone it a little bit until the yellow bus disappears at the end of the road, and then you do what you're required to do. So 20% from here, other percentages that have not been made unclassified there. So on the huge number of cases, we do our best to minimize collateral damage. The idea that you mentioned from Walzer, that we ought not to intend to kill civilians, non-combatants, is obvious. It's really obvious. Even one of the person who condemned us more than anyone else, namely Justice Goldstone, withdrew from his allegations concerning Operation Cast Lead, that we do it intentionally. We do not do it intentionally. We do it, when we do it, it's either mistakenly or protected by proportionality considerations and distinction
Can you define how the IDF thinks about the word proportionality, like what that word means?
Nobody knows exactly what proportionality means. By the way, both distinction and proportionality are not inventions of Israel or or Amnesty International. They were born in the Catholic Church many, many centuries ago. Perhaps if I have to mention just one name, it's Thomas Aquinas. Okay, so as remotely in the past, who articulated the idea of just war, where just meant according to Christian principles. But then in the 17th century, it was translated into legal terms by a person, Hugo Grotius, in the Netherlands, and become universal. I mean, there's nothing Catholic about it anymore. But nowadays Catholics are inclined to be pacifists, okay? Because they don't show the responsibility for the defense of anybody, so they can be pacifists. We cannot be pacifists because there are citizens in our back who are being attacked by the enemy. So even St. Augustine, who started thinking about the just war doctrine, I mean, he said about himself that he was a pacifist. He wouldn't kill a fly on the wall. But what should a Christian prince, who is in charge of the life of the citizens of the city, do about it? And he doesn't have to be a pacifist to turn the other cheek to the Ottoman Empire or Muslim crowd who are attacking the Vienna or somewhere else as it happened during those times. So we have to defend our citizens, and that's a supreme duty. We cannot, on any kind of circumstances, say we stopped protecting our citizens because that would mean too many casualties among non-terrorists. Never going to happen. I mean, people who are thinking about it from the squads from remote places like Princeton can look at it, neutrally and say, okay, here are people, and here are people, and let's do our proportionality computations. What they ignore is that here are people, and we are responsible to their life, and here are people where someone else is responsible to their life. And that someone else is a crook. That someone else is a terrorist who do all kinds of things in order to jeopardize life on our side, disregarding, perhaps even being happy about our killing people among the non-combatants because it produces beautiful pictures in the New York Times and CNN. So beautiful. So we have to protect ourselves, and we are not exempted from it under any type of conditions.
I'm going to pause and just take it to the floor. Yeah.
A number of questions, but just on something you just mentioned, I wanted to follow up with a question. This word might be triggering, but I mean it only in like a legal sense. I took a course in international law at Hebrew University over the summer, and one of the things that came up a lot was the laws of belligerent occupation. So I just wanted to follow up and see whether one is involved in a belligerent occupation or not. Are there any nafkaminas or any sort of implications of that vis-a-vis the citizens or civilians of the enemy?
Let me make two remarks. First of all, we in our doctrine consider Palestinians who live in belligerently occupied territories as if they're citizens. I mean, they don't participate in the elections and things like this, but we are in charge of protecting them. Mm-hmm. So there's never going to be, say, for example, a targeted killing operation in the Golan Heights or in West Jerusalem or in other parts of the West Bank where we are the people in charge. Okay, we're never going to do it. Gaza is different. We withdrew from Gaza. And therefore, in Gaza, we may, every once in a while, if necessary, and proportional, and things like this, we perform a targeted killing operation. So people in belligerently occupied territories where we have the effective control, our problem. We cannot. It's like police work. Okay, police does not jeopardize the life of citizens, right? It has to protect them from an attack being conducted by a criminal. Now, secondly, I'd like to say something about belligerently occupied. I mean, the left in Israel. I'm neither left nor right. I speak from the point of view of the principles that should govern a military force in a democracy. What I say should be convincing from the point of view of a person in military uniform whose personal views are left or personal views are right, or religious or non-religious or center or whatever. So I'm not speaking from any side. Although I have my personal views, but I express them during the elections, in private. Okay, so the left has managed to render the word occupation to stick to. I mean, there is some negative associations that have been stuck to the word occupation. Occupation. Now, when you speak about belligerently occupied territories, you have to draw a distinction between the IDF, the military force, who is the sovereign there, and the government. Those are two different levels. According to international law, when does a military force occupy the territory during a war? When do they have to withdraw? On two conditions. One, when the government decided that they withdraw. What we did in Gaza. Okay, so the IDF is not present in Gaza because the government decided that they withdraw. Secondly, another type of condition is when there is an agreement between the parties. There is no agreement, so there is no reason, and the government did not instruct them to remove themselves from the West Bank, from Judea, Samaria, call it as you wish. So they stay there. Military occupation of those territories is perfectly legitimate. I mean, I'm not speaking about a certain activity of a certain soldier, but the very presence of the IDF in this area is perfectly legitimate by international law, by morality, but whatever you want. If you have problems concerning our stay there, not on the micro level of single soldiers, but on the grand level, the macro level of the government, then, yeah, right, the government is the right target for complaining about the situation. Mm-hmm. What I have to say about it, non-politically, is that every government of a democratic state ought to pursue peace. It's not something on the agenda of a certain party. Peace is the ultimate protection of the life, well-being, first of all, of soldiers, and secondly, of everyone. So, pursuit of peace is an obligation of a democracy. It's not something, marginally considered because it's politics. It's not politics. It's the essence of democracy. When there are enemies who jeopardize the life of citizens, then you have to protect the life of the citizens. Now, the ultimate protection is peace. Behind my back, I saw a beautiful saying by Natan of Nemirov. Okay, that's the name they used. I don't know why. Okay, first of all, there is a whole Masechet in the Mishnah which says Gadol HaShalom. And the rabbis say Gadol HaShalom and bring evidence from this verse, from that verse, this consideration, that consideration. There is a whole list, 20 sayings of Gadol HaShalom. And what I'm saying now is Gadol HaShalom because it's a democratic necessity. It's the ultimate protection of the citizens.
You want to follow up quickly?
I have other questions. Well, that was my follow-up to that.
Okay.
But I have other
Go
questions.
ahead.
So I think it was Dennis Prager who has the following thought experiment, where he says, if you had a nuclear weapon, would you trust it in the hands of an atheist or some sort of religious person? And he uses it to defend intuitively religious morality. But I'm wondering, in terms of the IDF, would you prefer the individual soldier to be secular or study philosophy, believes in ethics, or someone who believes in the messianism of Shvi Yehuda Koch to fulfill? And I'd actually like to ask
Are those the only binaries that are available?
Yeah, exactly.
In
Right.
Scripture?
So maybe you can challenge the.
First of all, the facts about the attitudes of different kinds of soldiers. Together with a social psychologist at some college in Israel, we conducted an experiment. The students in his classes, I was in charge just about what exactly is proportionality, what exactly is distinction, things like this, conceptual. I was in charge of the conceptions, but he was in charge of the experiment. And he asked the reserve, hundreds of reserve soldiers, what is their attitude toward using fire against people in a building, people including both combatants and non-combatants. And the results are amazing. The more religious they are, the more fire they use. The more authoritarian is their personality, the more fire they use. The more rightist they are during the elections, the more fire they use. So there is no guarantee that since people have been educated in religious schools of whatever kind, then they're going to be more restrained, more bring into account more considerations of protecting human dignity. Chaviv Adam shenivra b'tzelem, it doesn't interest them too much under such circumstances. So on the level of facts, it's a stereotype that you have in mind, but forget it. It's wrong. It's empirically wrong. Now, nuclear power is a very important issue. There is a policy in Israel since ages of not discussing it in public, admitting that Israel is a nuclear state. So we speak just about the principles. And the major principle is that nuclear force is not going to be used. But when you have it, there is a possibility of its being used, and that plays very strongly to enhance deterrence. So the moment, why are we so opposed to nuclear power in Iran? I don't think that the Ayatollahs are going to launch it over Israel. Because they can imagine what the second strike of Israel will be. They'll get destroyed. I mean, there is a professor of political sciences in the United States who wrote a paper, it's a fiction, because nobody has access to the right data. But he wrote a paper. What's going to happen if Israel uses its nuclear arsenal and Iran its nuclear arsenal? Assume they have. Then there are going to be hundreds of thousands of casualties in Israel, and 10 of millions of casualties in Iran. Okay, and they know it. They're not silly. Although they act as if they're idiots, like denying the Holocaust and things like this, they're not. They're quite smart and manipulative, and they know what they're doing. They're enemies, but they won't use nuclear weapon. So the idea of using nuclear weapon is it's impractical. Nobody has done it since 1945. And if you can imagine a situation where Truman thinks again, retrospectively, about the nuclear bombs of 1945, I allow myself playing with the idea that he wouldn't have done it. So there is nuclear in deterrence on both sides.
Yeah.
Professor Kasher, thank you for speaking to us. It's a great honor. I served in Dover Tzal and had the opportunity to cite Ruach Tzal many times to journalists. And I personally, I have complete faith in the military justice system within the IDF. But I'd like to ask a broader question. Basically, you talked a lot about how in Israel, in a conscripted citizen army, the soldiers very much are civilians, and the civilian population view soldiers as very much civilians. This is something that became very evident in the public reaction to the Elor Azaria case. And my question is not about how the military justice system reacted, but rather the public reaction, to a soldier who essentially violated orders and took it upon himself. And is there a role, as far as the IDF's ethical training, in imbuing individual junior soldiers, not just the top brass, with those ethics, but also having a public discussion in the citizenry about that? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I've not been warned that there is a representative of Dover Tzahal.
Former.
I don't mind. Usually Dover Tzahal is on your side.
I'm not even in Miluim.
Okay, I'm joking. First of all, one should draw a distinction between, justice in the IDF is not the whole picture. Justice is the military, police, investigators, and the prosecutors, and the judges in a military court. That's just half of the picture. The other, more important half, is the commanders, who have not the law in mind, but the values, the ethics, the spirit of the IDF. So when that soldier shot a terrorist, the commanders immediately did their job of debriefing, which they do all the time, and reached the conclusion that this had been utterly wrong. Not just against the commands, against rules of engagement. It was against every principle and every value in the spirit of IDF. It's 100% wrong. Nothing justifies it from the point of view of the commanders, which is the value, which are the values and the spirit of the IDF. It's ethics. It's in bello. Now, you don't kill. Very simply put, you kill only if it's a necessity. If it's not a necessity, you don't kill. I apply this formula everywhere. Capital punishment, for example. Was it a necessity to kill those poor people? Where was it? In Arkansas, recently? 4 people? No, it's not a necessity. You can keep them in jail. So it's wrong. But that's another story. Now, the commanders did their debriefing and reached the conclusion that this is wrong. The justice system of the IDF did their job. The IDF JAG, the highest lawyer of the IDF, is independent in his decisions, which means I know him very well, and I fully trust him. He doesn't talk to the chief of staff to ask him whether he should indict a person or not. He should send someone to the court or not. He is independent. And he saw that there is something similar to murder, but killing, manslaughter. It seems to have been a case of manslaughter. So he sent it. He sent it to the court. And those two systems reached exactly the same conclusion. The commanders in half a day, and the lawyers, it took them weeks because, a legal procedure, the court procedure is different from what the commanders do. And asking different questions, having different types of rules of evidence, bringing things like this. Okay. Now, Israel is in a situation that I guess you don't really understand. Israel has somehow put itself, Israeli politicians put themselves, and with the politicians is the press, it's the media. So the mixture of politicians and media put itself into a condition that usually you see in a democracy only during election periods. Okay? During election periods, the friction is stronger because I want them to vote for me, so I attack him, and vice versa. So there is an atmosphere of election time. Even when you look at the peculiar American recent elections, President Trump acts, even Trump acts now differently than he used to act during election time. Okay? There are many lies. Now there are lies do appear. Obvious lies. Whether it's raining or not. I mean, he's willing to lie about everything. But now they are much less, it's much less conspicuous than it used to be. Okay? Because election time is different. Election time is different. There are rules of the game called election. Now Israel, the politicians and the media put themselves into the condition of perpetual election period.